Hello guys. So we have a pretty long formula here because today I'm going to talk about how to take a derivative applying the product rule. So the first step we need to understand is understanding when to use the product rule. Understanding when the product rule is useful and when it's not useful. So notice how for this function, doing algebra would not necessarily help us simplify this function because we cannot combine the natural log of x with x squared. Now, if we had natural log of x divided by natural log of x cubed or whatever, then yeah, we could apply natural log properties to simplify it into one algebraic expression. But right here, we have an x squared, we have an algebraic expression, and we have a natural log expression, and they're being multiplied by each other. So to take this derivative, we have to apply what's known as the product rule, which is very simple. So it's basically f of x times g of x prime is equal to fx times g prime plus gx times f prime. So it's pretty straightforward. So basically what we do for this problem is be able to recognize that we have two functions being multiplied by each other. So without further ado, we have to identify f of x and g of x. So we identify f of x to be, it doesn't matter what you select as what, but I'm going to pick x squared as our f of x, and our g of x is going to be what's left in the function. So in this case, it's the natural log of x. So those are our f of x and g of x because there's two functions being multiplied by each other. The next step would be to take the derivative of each. So f prime of x, g prime of x. So f prime of x and g prime of x. So the derivative of f of x is 2x. The derivative of the natural log of x is 1 over x. And if you don't know how to take derivatives of natural logs, I have a video on that. It's pretty simple. Take the derivative of x and divide it by itself. So now the next step is literally as easy as just plugging into formula. So plug into formula. So the formula is that the derivative of f of x times g of x is equal to f of x times g prime of x plus f of f prime of x times g of x. So all we literally do is just copy and paste the variables we identified up here into the formula down here. So f of x is x squared times g prime of x, which is 1 over x, plus f prime of x, which is we identified as 2 of x, times g of x. G of x is the natural log of x. And this would all be equal to the function y prime. This is the derivative of, and you could go a step further. You could cancel that out. That one cancels out to just be x. Just use simple algebra to cancel that out. That one's pretty simple to cancel out. But otherwise, that's all I have for y'all. So that's how you take the product rule. Basically, step one is identify you have two functions being multiplied by each other that cannot be simplified using algebra. Step two, identify your f of x and your g of x. Step three, take the derivative of those to identify your f prime of x, g prime of x. Step four, plug it into the formula. This is the formula for the derivative. using the product rule. Whenever you have two functions being multiplied by each other, this is the formula to get the derivative. All this is equal to y prime. And that's how you do it. Follow the instructional. I hope this problem was helpful. Thank you guys. If you keep watching, I have more videos on other subjects as well. Alright guys, so in this video we're going to go over how to solve for the product rule. And the product rule is basically it's applied whenever we have two functions that are being multiplied by each other. So the derivative of f of x times g of x, the derivative of that is f prime of x times g of x plus fx times g prime of x. So notice this function right here that we have, cosine of x times 5x raised to the 8th power is equal to y. Notice that we can't simplify this problem using algebra, and we cannot combine these terms. So we have two different x terms. So basically what we have to do is we have to apply the product rule in order to take this derivative, because we have two x terms that cannot be simplified by using just simple algebraic arithmetic. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pretend like the 5's not here. So for now, we're just going to take it out, and we're just going to have cosine of x times x raised to the 8 is equal to y. We're going to look at this function inside the parentheses. We're going to put the 5 outside it, and we're just going to pretend like it's not there. But we'll bring it back into the equation once we finish. So now that we're ignoring the 5 for now, we need to identify f of x and g of x as the functions of this, as the two x functions of this derivative that we're trying to take. So I'm going to go ahead and denote my f of x as cosine of x, and my g of x will be denoted as the other term, which is equal to x to the 8th. So now the next step would be in order to plug into this formula, we need f prime of x and g prime of x. So we're going to take the derivative of f of x to get f prime of x, and we're going to take the derivative of g of x to get g prime of x. So the derivative of f prime of x, the derivative of cosine is negative sine of x. The derivative of g prime of x is, applying the simple derivative property, it's going to be 8x to the 7th. So now we have our variables for differentiation. So now the next step would be to just simply plug it all into the formula. So we plug into formula. So in order to do this, we need to have the formula up here. We need to understand it, and we simply just plug in the terms. So the formula up there is, I'm going to go ahead and write it down again down here. F prime of x times g of x plus f of x times g prime of x. All this is equal to y prime. The derivative of this function is equal to this formula. So without further ado, we plug in the terms. So we have f prime of x, which is negative sine of x, times g of x. Our g of x is just x to the 8th. So x to the 8th power plus the f of x, which is just cosine of x, times g prime of x. Our g prime of x is 8x to the 7th. To the 7th. I'm going to just put a little line right here. All this is equal to y prime, but don't forget that one thing that people might make a mistake on is the 5 is a constant that we pulled out. So we're going to multiply all this by 5. And if you want to take it a step further, you could distribute it. I'm not going to, because I think the purpose of this video was to teach you the concept of how to do the product rule. And distributing is pretty easy. You just distribute it out. I pulled a 5 out because I don't want to get it confused with either term taking its derivative. And anytime you see a constant, go ahead and pull it out because it makes the problem way easier. So this right here is our final answer. So 5 times negative sine of x times x raised to the 8th power plus cosine of x times 8x raised to the 7th power. And I hope that 7's pretty legible, but if you can't see it, I got it from right here. So that's all. I hope this video was helpful in teaching you a little bit about the product rule, but the basic concept is if you see two x functions being multiplied by each other, you take the derivative of each term. You take the derivative of each term and you plug it into the formula. So apply the product rule when you see two x functions being multiplied by each other. So right here we have cosine of x times 8x raised to the 8th power. Then we identify our f of x and our g of x as our two functions being multiplied by each other. That cannot be simplified using basic algebraic arithmetic. And then we take the derivative of each so we can plug them into this formula right here, which is f prime of x times g of x plus f of x times g prime of x. Afterwards, we plug them into the formula, and all this is also in the instructional. So if you don't take the time to read them, I highly do recommend that. And if you need help with other calculus, I have a whole playlist on it. And I hope this was helpful. Thank you.